insight and industry trends to a wider audience. With a track record that exemplifies excellence, Mr. Dennie has held pivotal roles and have had impactful change. He has served as the port operation managers at the Antigua and Barbuda Port Authority, orchestrating complex activities that kept the maritime wheels turning seamlessly. His dedication to strategic planning, operational efficiency, and meticulous execution has set benchmarks for others to follow. Notably, Mr. Dennie lent his experience as logistics specialist at the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, where he played an instrumental role in ensuring swift and effective disaster relief operations. His ability to optimize supply chain dynamics in challenging scenarios demonstrates his commitment to resilience and preparedness. Currently, as the Vice President of Port Operations at the Point License Industrial Port Development Corporation, Mr. Dennie is at the helm of transformating initiatives aimed at propelling port facilities and operations to new heights of efficiency and global prominence. His visionary leadership and strategic acumen are driving forces behind the growth and modernization of port infrastructure. Mr. Dennie holds an impressive educational portfolio as well, including a Master of Science in Logistics and Supply Chain from esteemed Caribbean Maritime University, as well as an MBA from the renowned University of Liverpool. His pursuit of knowledge is further underscored by certifications in global value chain, maritime port management, major aspects of environmental coastal management, and frontier of development policy. A chartered member of the Institute of Logistics and Transport, Mr. Dennie is recognized for his commitment to upholding industry standards and promoting professional excellence. His affiliations with Caribbean Institute of Certified Management Consultants and the Caribbean Studies Association further exemplify his dedication to fostering a diverse and collaborative network of like-minded professionals. Mr. Dennie is not merely a speaker for the day, but he is a harbinger of transformative ideas, a reservoir of knowledge, and a visionary driving change in the shipping and logistics landscape. We are honored to have you here, sir, and it would be our privilege to hear you out with utmost admiration and enthusiasm. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raymond, for that introduction. I am deeply honored and humbled to be here to share some experience. I just want to say that we'll be having a conversation. I like to have that facilitation of back and forth. So the slides would only serve as a platform from which we can just have some questions and answers. Okay, so my the main objective this morning is to really have a conversation on how we explain in the context of the management issue, why this is a problem that we need to look at, the concept of humanitarian logistics management, describe some of the challenges in humanitarian logistics, describe particularly the role of ports in disaster response, and identify some key research managerial implications. Dave Waters noted that without logistics, the world stops. And if you look around you, you will discover that everything that you do in life is really built around logistics. You have to catch a flight to meet at a particular destination. That demands a lot of planning. To come to work every morning, you have to have your transportation in place. you have to have the right transportation at the right place at the right time to get you at the right destination. So logistics is very, very important, and it serves us on a practical basis every single day. What is the context of this discussion? Disasters have been occurring regularly, rapidly over the last, 40, 50 years, and even more so with the impact of climate change and all of the other shocks that will help to shape our whole environment. Right now, last week, we had the impact of Hurricane Idalia in Florida that cost about $9.6 billion in damages, and also it removed power from about for about 300,000 persons are without power as we speak. So the economic losses of the impact of disasters has really caused this to be an issue that requires urgent attention, and that is the reason why this conversation that we're having is critical. It's very important. The impact of disasters are real. We've had major fires in South America. We have had major fires in California, and these have disrupted economies, disrupted lives, have transformed spaces. Even in the Caribbean is the second most prone disaster region in the entire world. We are exposed and vulnerable to various weather systems, particularly the hurricanes, flooding. Also, we have volcanic eruptions, and also too, you have all of these local flooding, flash floods that will come up from time to time. I should say that in particularly the hurricane season in the Caribbean starts around June and goes all the way down till October. And we have had various categories of hurricanes. Cat 1 hurricane normally is between the speed of 74 to 95 miles per hour. But the major hurricanes that have really been so impactful has been the category 4 and 5. Category 4, it's between 130 to 156 miles per hour winds. And then a category 5 or a Cat 5 hurricane, it's above 157 miles per hour. So they do have significant economic impact on countries. We had the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, which literally devastated the ports and the capital in Haiti. And the human suffering and devastation is just very, very emotional. And right now in disaster management, there's emerging the new thinking that besides having the response mechanism for providing relief, etc., there is the conversation on the need for more psychosocial support because of the psychological trauma that disasters can do to individuals by disrupting their spaces, removing their livelihoods, impacting them, having that socioeconomic impact upon their lives, destroying infrastructure, etc., has really called for the need for that type of professional intervention. In my home country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have had the impact of volcanic eruption, which has literally devastated our country. The last eruption occurring in 2021. Prior to that, we've had eruptions from 1718, 1812, and in 1902, we had one of the largest eruptions that killed almost 1,500 persons in 1902. And then in 1971, there was an effusive eruption, which was followed in 1979 by a very, very explosive eruption, like 2021, which required the evacuation of more than 20,000 persons from the danger zone. So the challenge that we have here that has been really that really underpins all of this, all of these disasters, has been the ability to provide the logistics systems that is really urgently needed. So I'll speak about the word logistics and the historical overview. Traditionally, logistics meant skilled in calculating, and it's really a military of military origin, whereby the particular officer was assigned to ensure that the supplies and the weaponry, all of the material that is needed to fight the war was placed up front and mobilized up front for the soldiers, so that they ensure that they had the food, the equipment, everything that they need. And is how do you facilitate? Because what the thinking was that you can have the best army in the world, but if you don't have the logistics in place, you are going to lose. Napoleon Bonaparte once said that an army marches on its stomach. And that has been the whole theme. So within the realm of logistics, we are really speaking about three current strands in the logistics field. We're speaking about the military logistics, and emerging out of that was the what we call commercial logistics. And coming out of that now, we have the humanitarian logistics. So these are really the three common themes or areas of studies that we see today when we speak about logistics. And we speak also to what it's the amazing pyramids that were built 2,700 years BC, and the concept of moving these massive stones that weighed several tons today is a living miracle and marvel, as to understand the type of equipment and the manpower that they were able to use to facilitate these wonderful pyramids that we see today. Now, when we speak about humanitarian logistics management, we're speaking about the science of how we manage what we call end-to-end logistics, managing, planning, controlling the efficient flow of material information from the point of origin to the point of consumption, for the purpose of meeting end beneficiaries' requirements. The difference between commercial logistics and humanitarian logistics management is that there are different motives. The objectives are different. One is to alleviate suffering. The other one is to really position a company to ensure that it meets its strategic objectives, primarily financial, environmental, social, whatever those objectives are. So the humanitarian logistics involves several areas. It involves activities around planning and policy making. It involves warehousing. It involves transportation. It involves information technology. It involves personal training, and it involves the organizational resources. So that is in a nutshell, when we speak about logistics and humanitarian logistics, is primarily how do you deliver the right supplies in the right condition, in the right amount to the right people at the right time, using the right transportation mode. And I just want to say here that one of the challenges that I've seen in humanitarian logistics, particularly when we look at the right supplies in the right conditions, one of the disheartening experiences that I've had, and I've seen it in different countries, following the impact of disasters, I know that there are many companies that would send material for assistance, and several times some of these material, they are expired goods. And I'm saying that people who are suffering deserve the best, And many times we are sending as if companies are emptying their warehouses of the goods that are more or less in not the right condition and sending them to a disaster area where people are vulnerable and need to have the right supplies in the right condition, because they all, I mean, it is just, to me, just unethical and just immoral to send expired goods to a particular destination that has been impacted by a storm or any form of disasters. I've seen it in the Bahamas. I was there when the impact of a Category 5 Hurricane Dorian, where supplies came from around the world, but then some of the supplies could not be used, and we will get into another conversation on that. But I just wanted to throw that in. Now, the Humanitarian Aid Logistics is a cluster of different institutions and agencies. You have donor agencies, and these are primarily external agencies. You're speaking about like UNICEF, the United Nations World Food Program. You have NGOs, you have the media, intergovernment agencies, of course, the need for the national police and armed forces, and the commercial and private sector, and of course, the local population. So at this time, we are going to look at the framework for humanitarian logistics. It normally commences externally, and each country has a level of which they will require external assistance. So some countries have a level 1, where it is something local, where the local area communities can respond to that. There may be a level 2, and that's where it's a national emergency, but not declared a disaster. And that is where the national resources are available to respond to that. And also there's a level 3, where the disaster overwhelms the capacity of the national government country to the extent that it immobilizes its own resources, infrastructure, personnel to actually reach to the particular destination to alleviate suffering and to meet the demands and needs of persons and areas that have been impacted. So the goods would come in delivered via air, inland, or maritime transportation, which we speak about is it's the cheapest form of lowest cost of transportation, can carry greater amounts of cargo to respond. But in a lot of the cases, because of the impact that needs emergency response, some countries have received aid via what we call an air bridge, whereby you could set up different logistics hubs in different countries, and you can land goods in cargo in one country and have it transported to another country. Because many times the infrastructure of the country may be that badly damaged, such as its airports and its seaports. And there is a need to always have alternative landing spaces to facilitate that type of movement of goods. And there are central warehousing. But I must say that one of the challenges, as we come to the slides, we look at to see some of the challenges that we see in this framework in moving the goods from point A to the last point, where you go through the various warehouses and you have your distribution centers, and where you finally reach the affected region. I'll share some of the practical experience that I saw, how from the practitioner's perspective, that humanitarian logistics can be further enhanced. The academic development of humanitarian logistics management. The field of humanitarian logistics is in its infancy stage of development. It's an area of new research. It was triggered primarily by the disasters of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, and it triggered the need for the public recognition of logistics as a critical feature of disaster relief, because the impact was so overwhelming, and we saw there were many logistics bottlenecks, the significant cost implications as a consequence of that. And we note that the relief was not able to reach the right people at the right time at the right places in the right condition, because there were major bottlenecks, particularly at the ports, inland transportation. And so all of these factors have contributed to a rise in studies in logistics as a way to try to alleviate suffering. And so over the years, there have been different areas, focus areas, from academia to looking at how humanitarian logistics can be developed. And so the literature, the scholarly literature, primarily looked at the warehousing, transportation, plans and policies. They have looked at information technology and also organization equipment and personnel. So these have been the major areas that the scholarly literature has looked at the last 20 years. But as I noted before, that it is an area that has received significant attention from practitioners and academics as they look to see and identify lessons learned. There has been many frameworks and models have been developed over the years to identify what is the best approach towards responding to disasters from the perspective of the humanitarian logistics. So it is really an emerging field, and it's a very interesting field. I'm very excited about this field, and there are many areas of future research when we get there we can look at to see. But it's so from 2004 we have had several articles being published in the leading scholarly journals. And from the practitioner's perspective, we have seen in the region where governments are now starting to pay attention. I should note that disaster risk management has not been given the type of, I would say, strategic priorities in the region, which is relatively ironic, given our vulnerabilities to exogenous shocks, such as disasters. And the challenge that we do have is the need to have more persons being fully aware as to why we should be paying attention to this particular area, because it disrupts the entire economic paradigm. So this is just an overview of the impact of the tsunami 2004. What are some of the key challenges in humanitarian logistics management? From my experience and from the practitioners, from the scholarly literature, challenges that I've seen is, one, the inefficient coordination among the agencies, right? One of the challenges that you have is the every agency that is in the area, they'll mainly focus on their particular mission. And so what you have is a competition for resources because you're competing for the national resources. Also, what you do have is that you have an influx of agencies that will respond to the disaster. And in so doing, there is not that level of coordination among them to determine what are the key areas, how can we collaborate, how can we make this, this more efficient. And there's a lack of the end-to-end visibility. And of course, one of the main areas is the unplanned items. If you, I guess, person would have been in a disaster, hurricanes, etc., and there's a massive influx of unplanned, unsolicited items. Now, these, the persons who are responding, they do have all good intentions. They want to help. They are moved emotionally and also by their own vision to help to respond. But in so doing, we get an influx of items that the country does not need. And what this does, it ties up important time and resources in sorting through all of these material, which otherwise that time and effort with personnel could have been used elsewhere. So this is one of the major hurdles in humanitarian logistics. How do you deal with that? And there is a need in the region for further development of a regional relief management policy. When I was at CDMA, I was part of that process in one, developing a regional relief management policy, two, by developing a national logistics plan for the various countries who are part of CDMA, namely 18 CARICOM states, so that countries can have those policy documents to help to guide them. Lack of shipment documentation, limited trained personnel. One of the very important aspect of humanitarian logistics is that there is a revolving door of personnel that will that are in these humanitarian relief organizations, and there's not sufficient training. I remember being in Antigua, we had the from the impact of Irma, and one of the challenges that I saw was that today you're dealing with one particular person, and within a couple of days, another person he enters into the system. And the challenge that you have is that persons are not trained, and this creates a further set of bottlenecks. So you have organizations who would want to help, but limited personnel, also to infrastructure damage hinders you. In 2010, the impact of the earthquake in Haiti just devastated the port. We had the impact of Irma in Dominica that really just devastated the ports and just brought everything to a halt. So this resulted in logistics bottlenecks. And of course, one of the challenges that you see, I don't know if you guys would have experienced, is that when there's a disaster, we have the emergence of different organizations just started to pop up. And many of these organizations, they have not been vetted, but they have malintentions because it's this see an opportunity to exploit a situation whereby they can get the public to send monies to them with, well, their declared intention is to send these funds and resources to the impacted countries. But in recent time, we have seen that there's been a growth of these institutions, which have led to fraud. But one of the biggest barriers to humanitarian logistics is the political barriers. Whenever a disaster occurs, it is a political issue. It's very, very highly political. My experience has shown me that the challenge with this is that some of the regions may not necessarily get the right resources at the right time, mainly because of the political powers that exist. They are looking to see how this situation can be positioned to benefit for the next general elections. So the typical discussion is that never let a crisis go to waste. So politicians can many times have hindered the process, not scopes with the access to accurate information. One of the things about humanitarian logistics, and we're back to the political impact, the needs many times, they are not properly defined. So immediately after an impact, you may hear the leader of the country or the leader of the disaster organization may identify needs, but many times this information may not necessarily be accurate. And so what I've seen is that we have had an overwhelming response in a particular product. I've seen, for example, water. I saw in Dominica, there were just the containers upon containers of water that could not be consumed, and it was just too much water for the persons, because there were other priority items that were required, but water just moved to the top. And so countries need to identify and create and have professionals in place to identify the critical needs lists, so that when that first communication is sent out, that is what the public responds to. So if there are any misinformation in that initial response, the country can be overwhelmed with a lot of materials that they may not necessarily need, or it's too much for consumption. I remember in the Bahamas, we had about nearly 25 containers, 40-foot containers of water. That was just too much water. And so the other challenge is, of course, the high logistics costs that is associated with thing, because as I noted on the previous slide, 60 to 80% of the humanitarian response is tied up in logistics costs. And logistics costs are associated with delay times. How can you move through the process to ensure that you can get the right material at the right time, at the right location, to the right people? So that is also a challenge. Okay, next slide. Right. So I just want to share with you some components that impacts the logistics services, and these are what we call third-party logistics systems. The port is a third-party logistics service provider, in that it has been inserted into the supply chain from the various actors in the what we call the first-party logistics. This would be the manufacturers, the wholesaler. This is the source of the origin of the goods. And also you have the cargo. So these are primarily the cargo owners. And then they will book the cargo on vessels. So this becomes the second-party logistics transportation. And so you have now the third-party logistics service providers, which are ports. And of course, there are fourth-party logistics service providers. These are logistics providers who would manage the entire supply chain. And of course, there's another layer, what we call the fifth-party logistics third-party logistics system. So these are the real actors that interface whenever we are impacted with a natural disaster. And we are going to be focused on the third-party logistics service provider, primarily the port. Next slide, please. So the port system is an ecosystem of various activities. We are familiar with the vessels berthing up at the harbor. You have the ship entrance system where vessels are berthed, and you have the unloading system. So ports primarily do three functions: receiving, storage, and delivery. So they receive the cargo at the docks. The cargo is then stored in their yard, in the terminal yard, and the cargo now goes through the exit gate. Okay, and following that, the cargo now moves to the inland distribution, a road system, road network. So these are just the main system by which ports functions. And as we get into the port systems, we're going to see how the port impacts humanitarian logistics management. Next slide. Now, the role of the ports. Ports serve as a bridge between relief organization and affected people. So I'll say this, in 2020, we had the impact of the COVID pandemic, and what the Caribbean did was that, and I was a part of that establishment, an integrated regional logistics hub was established in Barbados, and the intent of that logistics hub was to provide humanitarian relief items, primarily gongs, ventilators, masks, etc., to the entire Caribbean regions. So the Caribbean Development Bank, along with entrepreneurs, they contributed towards the procurement of these items, primarily from China. And what we did was that we moved the goods from China to the UK, from the UK to Barbados. At the Barbados port, a warehouse, we were able to speak to the Barbados Port Authority, and a warehouse was established for us. And so when these containers, as these containers came in, we unstuffed these containers, right? And then we would rack these containers for the various destinations. So we would then reload these containers, what we call in shipping, consolidation of the cargo, and then we reload, restuff these containers for various destinations from all the way up to Belize, Jamaica, Bahamas, Antigua, Montserrat, St. Kitts, Dominica, St. Vincent, Grenada, Trinidad, Suriname, Guyana. So all of these countries received several containers of relief items that were so desperately needed during the impact of the pandemic. And that was facilitated through the ports. So what the ports did, the ports serve as a prepositioning, what we staging area, so that we can effectively store material, we can load material for a particular destination. I did that in Antigua, where we had several containers being prepositioned for dispatch to the to Dominica, right? So that this role of the port is very, very important. And of course, the port provides transportation. It offers you efficiency, reliability, security, and aids significantly in the recovery, because the response phase of the disaster is so very important. But what is very much important is the planning, the preparedness, so that when ports are impacted, they must be able to respond effectively, because 90% of the cargo comes through maritime transportation. So any response to disaster, maritime transportation is there to facilitate it. And of course, the port offers connectivity, planning, distributions, and also it facilitates evacuations. If persons have to move from one point to another point, you go to the port. In the Bahamas, to facilitate this, we would have, through the World Food Program, we chartered a vessel to move goods from one island to another island to ensure that the materials reach the impacted communities at the right time with the right amounts to the right people. And so it's very important as ports serves as that critical interface to bridge the relief items getting to its final destination. Next slide, please. Yeah. So because ports serve as the main entry for relief items and cargo volumes, it is very important that the infrastructure at ports is maintained, that personnel are trained to operate. So ports provide storage capacity, and as I said, the warehousing consolidations, and also to the advent of containerization in 1956 has aided ports significantly in what we refer to as the last mile logistics. That is when the cargo moves from the port to the end beneficiaries. That is the most critical phase. A lot of the times, attention is being paid to the first mile logistics, but getting the cargo on the last mile logistics requires significant coordination among all of the actors. So what ports do is that they're able to, through their warehousing, they're able to help to sort out unsolicited items, push them in one corner, move them away, and be able to allocate a specific space that would allow the country to move the required items speedily and not be bottlenecked by other items that are not needed. And then the multiplicity of berths, ports are able to berth several ships. Some ports have 4 or 5 different berths. So in the relief aspect of things, the berth serves as a critical hub to enable cargo to move from point A to point B. Also, ports facilitate inland distribution. One of the things that, and this is very important because ports have the necessary infrastructure. They have the port trucks, you have the containers, you have flat racks, stackers, cranes, trucks, equipment that, to put it in simple language, to pull or to move containers of relief items from the port to the impacted region or to a particular warehouse where it can now be unstuffed and be positioned. One of the critical point is that when we speak of humanitarian logistics, we spoke a while ago about meeting beneficiary needs. And so what I saw in the Bahamas, that the island of Abaco was significantly impacted and persons were without basic needs. So while we move the goods from the ports, we put the goods in the warehouse and we distributed the goods via charter. What we did on that last mile logistics was that we identified a school from which the distribution to the end beneficiaries was done. And what we did was that we set it up in a manner that the end beneficiaries got what they wanted for their own particular unique family situation. So we pre-package, we had items there, it's groceries, whether it's personal items. So we did not give out a handout. We placed them all on tables, desks, and we allow the beneficiaries to come in and they identify the specific items that they want, the volume that they want, the type of clothes that they want, the type of items that they want, so that logistics meeting the beneficiary needs. So many times in disasters, items are thrust upon the beneficiaries. And as I said, there can be a gap between what you're giving and what is actually required. So it's to me, it seemed best to try to identify their specific needs to meet their requirements. And that is one of the lessons that I would have learned, is that, and that's why the unsolicited items is a critical factor in responding to disasters. Next slide, please. Right. So as I close out here, there are several areas that needs to be identified probably for future managerial, for future research and managerial. And that is the management and coordination of the various actors in the response agencies. And it is imperative due to the socioeconomic implications, because what we have, as I said before, when a disaster strikes, different actors come into the theater with different agendas. And there's a lack of coordination among the actors as to what it is. So different actors are doing, they're doing different things. I remember in Antigua, we were loading a 40-foot container to Dominica, and the container was half full. And one particular relief item, one particular relief organization indicated that they have their own container to send. But so I suggested to them, to me, we have this container that is half full. Why not put your relief items in this container? And her argument was that her relief organization want to be visible. They are not going to get the credit. I said, but if we are looking to alleviate suffering, you can reduce your costs, you can alleviate human suffering, and also too, you can get the cargo there in a faster time than if you're going to wait for another container to load your container. And so I was able to finally convince her to consolidate your relief items in this container, and we were able to ship that one container with various items from various relief organizations to Dominica. So that's very important. So the role of the ports in disaster management is past. That is because well, historically, the role of the ports have not been seen as that critical economic artery that integrates logistics into a country. In other words, the port is that gateway that integrates a country into the context of globalization. What ports have been traditionally been seen as a place for labor-intensive operations, where the politicians can identify persons and send them to work at the port. The port is beyond that. The port is now technologically enabled with new modern equipment, trained personnel, etc. So we have moved away from a lot of the labor direct intensive operations and moved towards a more technologically enabled environment that can coordinate more efficient delivery. And so humanitarian as a discipline that is needs to be more broadly understood. It is not that known, as we indicated at this start, that the literature on humanitarian logistics is in its infancy stage of development. And so more research is needed, and policymakers need to have a more incorporation of disaster risk management. And in working with the OAS, we are seeing that ports now are now moving into that direction, into having this disaster risk management strategies being part of the disaster management framework of mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, all in an effort to improve last mile logistics and distribution. So that is, that brings us to an end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Curtis. It was definitely an enriching session for all of us. And the participants are very excited and they want to ask a ton of questions. And our QA box is overflowing with a lot of questions. So let's dive right into the questions. So our first question is, what will be the best approaches to overcome the listed challenges in humanitarian logistics, more specifically inefficient coordination among agencies?
I would say that there is a need for countries to establish first a national, well, depends on the size of the country, but it has to have a national relief management policy. Without that policy, it creates gaps. Secondly, they need to have that national conversation with donor agencies and to identify specifically the role of donor agencies in the environment. I think that is critical.